Welcome, everybody, to another edition of the Property Manager Broker podcast with my guest and co-host, Phil Mazur. And I am Brad Larsen, and we want to talk about a few things in the world of property management companies and buying, selling, valuing, building, all those good things that we've started and we're building off of episode 1. And so we're titling this episode, What We Do to Value Your Company. And there's there's 3 or 4 different methods of valuation that you're going to find in trying to determine what your company is, air quote, worth. There's valuation methods, there's comparison methods, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, there's all kinds of things. And not to get into the weeds, that's more the Phil side, but really nailing down the numbers. But, the biggest thing that we are going to try to do with you and working with you and your company and deciding what the company is worth is answering that very question. What my company is worth. So when we come into a situation where we're introducing ourselves to a new company owner, a new property management company, we're looking at it from all kinds of different ways. And mostly we're looking at it from a marketability standpoint of what a buyer will be willing to spend to buy your management company. And that is the crux of buying and selling. And so, on appraisals, for example, I always joke, I've been doing real estate sales for 15, 16, 17 years. I have to look back and count the numbers, 17 years. And, when you get a home under contract, for example, or anything under contract, that is defining the buying and the selling aspect. Well, you have a seller willing to sell it for X and you have a buyer willing to pay X. That must be what it's worth, right? It's a very simple concept. And so answering what my company is worth. Now, Phil, I'm going to bring you in here. Kind of give me a little bit of sense of how you would help answer that question. When we first start to work with somebody, we're going to help determine them what their company is worth. Let's kind of kick this around and see what we can come up with. Go from here.
Yeah, I think there's like a quick and dirty back of the napkin type of calculation that we can come up with, like literally within minutes. Okay, just based on asking you some questions. And then there's like the detailed, due diligence level, what is your company worth conversation. And that's where we're really kind of digging into your numbers, verifying a lot of things. And I think that one thing that's important to understand, and one thing that you and I are trying to do to help this industry, is to get more data out there in front of people that can actually be used, because I think that's something that's very much missing in our industry. And we're going to talk today about multiples and standards of multiples for valuing a business. And there's some issues because of I'd say the life cycle of what this industry is right now. It's kind of early in the overall consolidation. And maybe it's not, maybe I'll look back and we'll say that this wasn't early in 5 years, but there's not a ton of data out there. So hopefully with what we're doing here in the near future, we're going to start creating some of that data.
That's a good point. And here's what I'm going to go with this. Is these aren't publicly traded companies. There are no Google's buying whomever or anything like that, to where the multiples and the things are disclosed, the price and terms are disclosed. A lot of this is hearsay, because we might talk to a seller a year, 2 years, 3 years later after a transaction and say, hey, what'd you sell for? And they might give you an honest answer. They might say, I'm bound by a non-disclosure. They may not even be willing to talk about it because they want to be coy about it. And so getting those actual multiples on several transactions are difficult. So we don't have like hardcore data like you would see on a Zillow, right? Because everything that sells for homes, for example, I always go back to that, because this is very common in a comparison method of putting a X product on the market. That could be a home, that could be a business, that could be anything. And then it goes into the marketplace and it sells. Well, on that side of the world of homes, all that data becomes public knowledge. I mean, it goes through the tax records. There's going to be some sort of, deed that's filed. I mean, there's all kinds of records of it, or at least within vicinity. And then of course you have tax records. Third-party entity like the county that you're in is going to value that property for tax assessment value purposes. There's nothing like that in businesses. I mean, there really isn't. And so there's no real record of anything that's going on as far as sales. So we almost have to like create them from scratch. Okay, we kind of know what it's worth, but then it goes back to what a buyer is willing to pay, what a seller is willing to sell. Now we have some ideas of those multiples. So having battled all of that, Phil, maybe we should kick around some multiples. You know, I've heard some stuff, you've heard some stuff. I mean, let's go through this and just kind of talk about the rumors. Here's what we've heard. Here's what we've seen. Go ahead.
Yeah. So, I mean, I've been through several transactions, so I've seen some actual multiples. And I think one thing that we need to talk about is like, what is it a multiple of? Okay, that's the first question. Because in business acquisitions, you know, when you talk to a banker or you talk to a CPA, a lot of times you're going to hear the word multiple. Well, what are you multiplying it by, right? So let's get that out of the way first, because there's really the common term, which is an accounting term, which is EBITDA, which is EBITDA, earnings before interest, taxes, depreciation, amortization. Ugh, accounting stuff. Everybody hates it, right? So what does that really mean? Well, basically it's your profit, okay? You know, I'm just going to keep this really simple. So profit times X, that's your multiple. So that's kind of a standard thing, and those multiples can vary among industry, okay? Then you've got another term, which is SDE, which is seller's discretionary earnings, very similar to EBITDA, but it's basically in terms of what you can bring home, you know, in your pocket as the owner of the company, discretionary. So you kind of take your salary out of that. You know, your salary, if you're actually working in the business, is something that will stay in the business, right? So how much are you kind of netting out and a multiple by that? And I've seen multiples 3 to 4. Okay. So if your company's bringing home $100,000, you might see a multiple of 3 to 4, $400,000 maybe. Okay. So we're talking real numbers here, but we are talking about property management, real stuff here that I've actually seen. I've seen completely different. And the question is why? Well, when you buy a property management company, what are you buying? Are you buying the company, or are you buying the ability to generate revenue? So essentially what I mean by that is you're buying a book of business. Okay. You're buying management contracts, and we'll probably get more into that kind of detail maybe in another podcast, but really you can have a property management company that generates $1 million in revenue with zero profit, right? Because what if you're running it poorly? Okay. So if you're multiplying 4 times 0, you still get 0, right? So is your company worth 0? Well, I don't think so. Personally, I don't think so. And what I've seen doesn't substantiate that argument, because you still have that book of business. You still have that ability to generate revenue with those contracts that you have, recurring revenue-based business, which is what we're really talking about here. That has value regardless of what your profit is. So if I'm a business out there that wants to acquire a property management company, first thing I'm looking at is their revenue. Top line, how much revenue can they bring in? Because if I come in and buy your business, we'll get into this, how am I going to operate it later? But like what your profit is isn't necessarily going to be what my profit is, because more than likely I'm going to come in and I'm going to start doing things my way. And I have a certain profit margin that my company can do. And I'm confident that I can take your book of business, put it under my system, and make my profit margin. So I don't really care what your EBITDA or SDE is per se. So I'm valuing it based on your revenue, your annual revenue. So let's talk about that multiple. Seen a few different numbers in there. I've closed deals less than 1 times revenue, and I say annual revenue. I've seen small deals close for as much as 50% annual revenue. I'm talking really small stuff here, but I've seen bigger deals close for 1.25, 1.5 times annual revenue. So if you have management fees and of the like that are $1 million, just to make it easy math, and your multiple is 1.5, again, $1 million annually, 1.5 multiple, we buy you for $1.5 million.
Now, we've seen several tiers of valuation numbers from, kind of start from the top. We've seen people value management companies and or companies in general off of the gross annual revenue. I've also heard of acquirers gauging or valuing a company off of the management fees, only the recurring revenue. So all of the weird revenue, like the leasing fees, the late fees, the stuff that's kind of up and down, seasonal, they don't value that. And they put a certain X multiple on only the recurring contractual fees, such as management fees, for example. And then, of course, you had the long discussion there about 3 to 4X multiple off of the net operating income, the NOI, which is also kind of termed as the EBITDA, which could also be kind of termed as the SDE, seller's discretionary earnings. And there's all kinds of weird terms for it, but it's sort of, air quote, within reason, the bottom line, right? What's the bottom line? And so that 3 to 4 to 5X ratio on net operating income, seller's discretionary earnings, EBITDA, those 1, 2, and 3 have kind of been what we've seen. Now we're talking about this a lot because, I've even seen people go and say, I think your management company is worth 0.8 to 1.5 of 1 month's revenue. And so it's like another spin on the whole thing. And then they take that by 12. So there's all kinds of spins on this. None of them are right. None of them are wrong. And it comes down to more or less what the seller is willing to sell for and what they're willing to buy for. Now, I got a good story here. So I was talking to a colleague just yesterday, and they ran into a large company in a neighboring city that managed 1,200, 1,300 homes, and their revenue was amazingly low. I mean, pathetically low. He told me the numbers, and I had to laugh out loud. And I said, dude, whatever you got to do to go in there and try to, get them an offer to make them potentially sell to you, do it. Because you can literally double that overnight, if not triple that revenue overnight by just implementing the common practice stuff that we're seeing in the industry. And apparently this operator had their head in the sand and was not paying attention to anything out there because the amount of revenue they were generating was stupid low and it was break even low. So that was kind of like exciting for him. We talked about it. He's like, you know what, you're right. I'm going to go do whatever I can to try and work with that potential seller to see if they'll sell to me. Because I can double, triple, quadruple that revenue almost immediately just by implementing a few things. Those are the kinds of businesses that will garner like a 2X or even a 3X gross revenue because they're so underperforming that a good operator can come in and improve that. And that's really what excites me about businesses more than anything else is the fact that the person that buys it has the control to improve that as they desire and will it to happen. I can't make the real estate market appreciate faster. I just can't, I have no control. But what I can do is make a business perform better and I can make it more profitable. I can streamline the expenses. I can increase revenue. I mean, I have that control of businesses. Outside of real estate, I don't. That's the beautiful thing about it. Now, to kind of change gears a little bit, let's kind of go and talk about the NARPM accounting standards and show how that influences what we talk about with multiples. So you have had the privilege of implementing the NARPM accounting standards in several different companies to include RentWorks, which is my company in San Antonio. And you kind of have some pretty good intimate working knowledge of what it looks like in the actual use. Now, I was on the committee with NARPM to actually implement it. We came up with the idea, we determined a budget, we hired a vendor, and essentially we just standardized the accounting practices for property managers. So they can literally plug and play the, what do you call them? All the Quicken data, the code, help me out, the GL codes, why is brain fart in there? Implement all the GL codes right there and then. So kind of talk about that as far as a platform and then how that relates to what we're doing in valuing companies.
The NARPM accounting standards serves a few purposes. And I, always want to encourage people to, if you're not doing it, to get a plan in place to get it put in. It helps you operationally. That's the first thing, because you're going to get standard data and you're going to be able to look at your data and internally know that you're putting things in certain GL codes or in your chart of accounts. They're going to allow you to create certain statistics that you've probably heard. If you're having this conversation, or if you're listening to this conversation, you've probably heard about certain KPIs that were kind of the intention of being able to put these things in these accounts. So it's allowing you to kind of follow a framework that says, okay, to get this statistic, I'm going to take this code divided by this code, or whatever it may be. And you kind of use that as to guide you, particularly if you're self-implementing something like this, to see, okay, what numbers make sense. You help yourself manage your monthly operations there. Well, then you take it to the next step and you say, well, how do I compare myself to somebody else? Well, there has to be some historical data created, and there has to be, an industry level way to share that data. So, you go there and you say, okay, let me compare myself to somebody else. Okay, so it allows you to do that. But what we're talking about here is acquisition. So where does it really help when it comes to an acquisition? This is, if I'm a buyer, I need to substantiate what you're telling me about your business in order to value. So we started the conversation by talking about the back of the napkin, like what's my revenue, what's my multiple? It's like, oh, well, you're generally worth about, $1 million if you do $1 million in revenue. Well, how do I really distinguish myself to say, I'm on that higher end? Okay. Well, you have to dig into the numbers, and you can dig into your numbers if you're not on the NARP and accounting standards, but really what it's going to do is really speed up that process. Because if I'm an acquirer or buyer, I can literally take your data and plug it into mine and start comparing you to me right off the bat. And if I can start seeing things like to see if you're a good fit for my business. Doesn't mean you won't be if you don't use the same codes as me, or if you don't have the same revenue types and all that stuff. But I can see very clearly and very quickly how you generate fees. Where you're profitable, how does your cost make up, in terms of people and systems and stuff. How does that look compared to mine? And I start to get a picture like, is this company going to fit in for me like pretty quickly, or is it going to take me a lot of work to put them on my platform? And that's important stuff, because you might still have the same value per se, but you might not be, you might not be, as attractive of a target, especially when you start putting multiple companies in comparison with each other. So if I'm an acquirer and I've got 2 or 3 options and I can only do one at a time, I'm going to look at the one that's the best fit for me. So if you have the data in the right place, that helps you tell if it is the right fit or not.
Well, that aside, just the right fit, the due diligence portion, but I'm going to start with more like the bottom line up front and then talk about that. The bottom line is, if someone is a management company is on the NARPM accounting standards, you and I, Phil Mazur and Brad Larsen, we can potentially market and sell that company better and for more money if they're on the NARPM accounting standards. And here's why. So that sounds like a big boast, but I am confident in this, that if someone is implemented the NARPM accounting standards, they have a year to 2 years of decent data, we can white label that company and offer it to several different acquirers at once. Several different acquirers in a potential blind bid can come after that potential management company and come after it with a higher value. And so you use a $1 million gross revenue, and the standard for the industry is $1 million of 1x gross revenue. Here's your check for $1 million. You check out and go to the beach. Or in this situation, if that company's on the NARPM accounting standards, maybe we get them 1.2, 1.4, 1.6. There's going to be a higher ratio be willing to be paid for, because it can quickly be looked at. We've looked at this before. We know that someone can look at a management company on the NARPM accounting standards in just a few hours versus a few weeks. Because if they have to take field X and put it into field Y on every single number and GL code, from looking to the left, from looking to the right, it makes an analysis extremely difficult. But if the numbers are in line, so management fees is GL 111 and management fees are GL 111 for the acquirer, they look at it line by line, and it's a very quick fashion, and they can also compare percentages and look at all different ratios. Man, it goes so well that I think you'd be missing the boat if you weren't on it, because it's going to be tougher for us to garner you a high value. And I want you to add into that if you can.
Yeah. So it's funny. It made me think of something that I used to talk about when I was interviewing people for jobs. I always wanted to do this, but I never had the guts to do it. But I always wanted to ask people, can I go outside and you show me your car? Like, I want to see inside your car and see how messy it is. Like, because that tells me something about you. Like, are you an organized person, or are you living in chaos? And I see that every single day with property management companies when I look at their accounting. If you give me access and I come in, I can tell within 5 to 10 minutes, how organized your company is, if you've got a mess on your hands. And I will tell you, almost every single time, I'm sure somebody would argue with me on this, but almost every single time, if the accounting's a mess, there's a huge mess inside the company, like overall. Processes aren't really refined. People aren't really clear on what they're doing. Money is coming in and going out the back door to some degree, right? So to me, if you call up and you're already on the NARPM accounting standards, I already know that you've kind of checked that box. Like your house is in order. And that shows a lot about the value of your company. Can I put a hard number on it? No, but I will tell you that other people are going to value you higher if you've got your stuff together.
I totally agree with that. And that's a big reason why we wanted to encourage all out there to look at adopting that. Now let's talk about the adoption just real quick. From a CFO standpoint, I come to you and say, hey man, I'm ready to do the NARPM accounting standards. What do I got to do? How long is it going to take? Even like a ballpark cost if you have one, but I know that depends on the size of the company and the mess, et cetera. But, just say, hey, this is how it's going to work in implementation phase of getting that NARPM accounting standards into your business. Talk us through that some.
Whenever somebody asks me to do that, I have to ask a bunch of follow-up questions, because are we simply converting your current general ledger account to the NARPM accounting standards, or is there a bigger issue behind the scenes? Because more often than not, there's I haven't reconciled my bank account in 8 months, or I haven't even filed my taxes last year, and you just go down this trail of, holy crap, we got some other things we got to deal with. But let's say you are currently closing your books, you're getting financial statements, and this is simply a data conversion. That's a pretty simple thing. We can literally go in, we can either rename some codes, we can change some codes, we can just kind of move some of the data into different codes. There's a couple different ways you can do it, and it's fairly easy, not cost intensive whatsoever. What you have to be aware of though is the accountant, bookkeeper, whoever is currently doing that for you, doing your accounting in QuickBooks or whatever system you're using, they have to now start using that. So they need to know, okay, what was once this code is now this other code. And that's a process that you really just kind of have to, do I have the people the person or say that actually has the capability of doing that? It sounds really simple, and it is for somebody like me, right, who does it on a day-to-day basis. And, but a lot of times bookkeepers are doing that 10% of their time. They're not great at it. So what I see is, and this is just the experience, it's like we implement it and then it fails to be followed. So then there's a follow-up and so on and so forth. So you have to consider that.
Let's talk about the why for a couple minutes too, on why should I even bother with the NARPM accounting standards if I'm going to sell my business, or if I'm going to, if my system right now is working, why break it? Well, because I believe that if you have an accounting standards implemented into your business, sooner or later, you're going to be a buyer and or seller. And so if you're a buyer and you go to a lender and the lender looks at your books and says, why should I lend you money? And they look at all these your NARPM accounting standards, they show you that you show them the checklist of how you've implemented this, and they see these multiple things that have been set up correctly. They're more apt to give you the money that you need to buy another company. So there's an acquisition reason why. There's also the sales reason why, which goes into our next portion of what we want to talk about in this podcast is coming up with an exit strategy. Everybody at some point needs to have some sort of exit strategy, and to be able to get there a year from now, 20 years from now, implementing something like the NARPM accounting standards gets you to a cleaner exit whenever that could happen. And a lot of times that sneaks up on you. As you know, working with property management company owners, the exit sneaks up. I mean, it can happen from illness to divorce to sudden shift in the market to your mindset just completely changing, and you say, heck with it, I want to go sit on the beach or play golf all day. All those things kind of sneak up on people. And if you're ready to exit, or what the heck, I mean, some other big company comes in and says, hey man, I'll give you a ridiculous amount of money for your management company. Are you ready to exit now? And you may not be ready to exit, but if the check's in front of you, it might be time to. So I would say always be ready in that regard to have that exit strategy in mind. So it starts with getting your books in order, which makes your business more sellable, makes it run better, makes it worth more, and sets you up for an exit and or an acquisition with a lender anytime you need to.
Yeah, and I'll just be blunt and bold with this comment. I mean, if you're listening to this podcast, you're interested in buying or selling, okay? Whether it's now or a year from now or 2 years from now. What I'm going to tell you is you need to have a level of sophistication within your business, okay? If you are literally debating on whether or not you should put the NARPM accounting standards in, continue listening and go do it, okay? If you're not going to do it, then stop listening. I mean, because literally, if you're not willing to make that small call, because the NARPM industry gave us this, okay? This is a benefit. It is to help for many reasons, but this is one reason, right? And to me, I'm like, I'm not gonna argue with anybody over if there's enough codes, if there's enough detail, all that stuff. To me, that's besides the point. Okay, you can put whatever level of customization you feel like you need in the system, but the tool has been given to you. Okay, it is the only tool from an accounting standpoint. So please just use it.
Well said. Please just use it. So here's the other fun one I had on my list of stuff we want to talk about is defining owner value of a company, because there's all these little things inside of owning a company that are very valuable to the owners themselves. For example, my truck payment is paid for by Rentworks. You know, there's things in there that, you know, things that go from the home or the personal side, they all kind of go out and flow around the business. Everything I do is, you know, a business write-off. I mean, there's all kinds of owner value, and this is a very tough one for you to define, but maybe kind of kick some of that around. Are you able to actually put a number on that sometimes?
This is important because what I do when I initially put people on NARPM accounting standards if I'm doing their accounting and I'm acting as their CFO on a regular basis. So one of the things I have to do initially is kind of clean up and separate any personal versus operating data. So what I do is I basically have some codes that I use if somebody's doing something like that, for whatever reason, it really doesn't matter to me, but we put those in a different code. I mean, even things like I have somebody who's running a, real estate sales. We have separate codes for real estate sales. All right. We have separate codes if you're running a vacation rental unit or a Airbnb or something like that. All right. So if you have certain expenses that maybe aren't really part of your operation, we can use different codes. They still get accounted for. You still reconcile your bank accounts. You know, you're able to do all those functional accounting things. But when I look at your reports on a regular basis and look at the P&L of your property management company, I can pull those out because I have report customization that allows me to do that. So that can be used whenever you're going to share this data during a due diligence or you're trying to market your company to be sold, because you need to pull that stuff out. So I've gone through it's just painful to go through a due diligence as a buyer and have to go through everybody's accounting like line by line and say, what is this? What is this? What is this? Is this personal? Is this business? You know, you have all this stuff. You have random charges that happen every month or every 3 months. It's like, it's really hard to get a grasp on that. So let's not discuss whether or not it should be in there or not. Let's just say I'm preparing myself to sell. So I need to separate those out. So it's very easy and clean when that day comes to share that data.
And that's important because an acquirer doesn't care about Brad Larson's truck payment. Okay, they have to understand that when they were to acquire the business that that person owns, they can take out all of their junk, their truck payments, their AT&T subscriptions to their mobile phones. I mean, just all that little BS that you're going to hide in or put into an expense column of a management company. All that's got to be taken out because you have to assume that you are going to go away 100%.
Yeah, and even as a company that's acquiring businesses, sometimes you'll use it for a different purpose, or just using individual codes for a different purpose. If you are investing, so to speak, in your company, you have extra overhead that you wouldn't normally have to run your company at its current size, but you're growing, right? You might want to separate those costs into a different account. You might not want them to show in your certain P&L or profitability factors. It's real money. You're really spending it, but you might want to separate those buckets. And if you use these accounting standards, you can use certain codes to help you do that.
Last question here. All right, you ready for this one? So if you're getting ready to buy a management company, for example, what few things would you need from them? A profit and loss sheet for X months, a balance sheet? I mean, give me kind of the rough list. 2-3 years of data. What are you looking for?
Yeah, initially I only need a couple things, and I need a couple years worth, 2 to 3 years worth of P&L statements. I would love to see that. Hopefully it's got enough detail so I can tell, what's management fee revenue versus something that might be not included, like real estate sales, for example. But if you're running a maintenance company, I want to see that separated and things like that. I also would be able to go into your property management software and just do a real quick level of checking on that. Because if I go into your property management software, I can see how many houses you have. I can see fees you're charging. It's a way to kind of substantiate that level of data. So going back to what we originally talked about, like revenue multiples, I'm trying to look at the top line. Yes, I'm interested in your P&L. I mean, don't get me wrong. I'm going to look at it. But to get the quick valuation, really only going to see your revenue. What is the history? How important is that? The history really just solidifies your data. It does make you more valuable. I mean, think about somebody who's a client of yours for 5 years or 5 months. So 5 years, I mean, there's a good chance they're going to stay, right? So I feel really confident about that revenue. 5 months, I don't know. You still have the contract though. So, I mean, in this industry, it's usually still a pretty good opportunity to earn that revenue. One other big thing that I think is really important comes out of your management software is how many owners do you have? And so it's like, what is my risk of loss on these client contracts that I'm going to buy? I really need to know that, because if you have 500 houses and 500 owners, there's less risk there of me losing that. But if you have 500 properties and 2 owners, that's scary to me. I'm going to do it for a lot more work, because that's one owner. If I lose one owner, I could lose a substantial amount of properties. So I might need to talk to that owner. That's a whole different story. But if I've got a bunch of onesie, twosie owners, they're probably going to fit into my strategy, and I don't really have to worry about catering to them. And that's a big deal when it comes to how do I operate my company. But those are some big things that I want to know right off the bat.
So I think a good idea for one of our episodes coming after this is going to be, we go through every single kind of metric that RentWorks has typically tracked and talk about it as the industry normal, air quote normal. And I really mean, for example, what is my staffing ratio, right? And so we go through that as a percentage of your revenue, and what is normal, what is healthy, question mark, right? So we go through those things and talk about it on a line by line basis. How much revenue should you generate per door, non-manager fees, manager fees. And we go through all this stuff kind of line by line and just kick it around, and we talk about what we've seen out there. And that would be some valuable resource for people to kind of understand, what they should be at, because that's the reason we did the NARPM accounting standards, is so management companies can compare left to right and be talking the same language. But let's kind of go through that in deep fashion and talk about what the language means. So I think that would be a good episode for next time. And let's wrap this thing up. And so I want to thank everybody for listening. Be sure to visit our website at propertymanagerbroker.com. If you're interested in learning more about the value of your management company, if you're interested in talking to us more about implementing the NARPM accounting standards, reach out to us and we would love to help you. Any parting words, Phil?
No, I think we're well on our way to hopefully getting some people excited. So I'm looking forward to the next episode.
Awesome. Thanks for joining, and we'll talk to you soon.